All right, everybody, welcome back to Rare Elvis Photos. Want to get this video in because I do have a conversation I'm going to be taping here with Derry Matera very soon. Within about, gosh, that would be, I think about an hour and a half from now. I'll be talking with him, and that'll be on tomorrow at approximately 10 or 11. It just all depends. It's usually a pretty long video, and it takes a while for the video to render and load, all that good stuff. But I did promise you that I'd read some more Elvis and Kathy. We're actually quite near the end of this book. You can see here in my bookmark. We may go revisit some parts. We might do some research on it. But for all intents and purposes, the book is pretty much just about done. Which is sad because I've enjoyed reading it. I've enjoyed Kathy Westmoreland's insight on Elvis. The personal things that she shared about him. The feelings she had for him. The kind of soul that he was. Yes, we've recently read about him saying some rude things to her on stage and saying some rude things to the Sweet Inspirations, but we know now it was a health thing, a medication thing. We know how people react with high blood pressure. All of us have had experience in the past with somebody like that, and they snap, they say things, they act a certain way, and then they usually apologize later, because that just wasn't them. So yeah. And I just released Are You Lonesome Tonight a little bit earlier today. And I dived in a little bit deeper on some of the questions that y'all were asking and some of the insinuations about it. And I found some good information that hopefully answers some of the questions. You know, I mean, maybe if you're a naysayer, you'll always be a naysayer. If you're on the fence, maybe it helps you get off the fence. But anyway, like I said, there's room for all sorts of opinions. So let's get reading here on the Elvis and Kathy. So, Kathy, where we left off, took her a couple hours just to get the gravesite on the day of Elvis's passing. She's talking to Priscilla right now. Priscilla's asking her if she's going to sing a song, and she doesn't want to sing a song. But one of the subscribers said that she thought that Elvis asked her to sing a certain song at his death. So I don't know. I don't remember this part in that part in this book. Maybe it's somewhere else. Maybe it's in an interview somewhere. But correct me if it's in this book. I mean, I must have read it. But I'm going to back up just a line or two before we stopped. Okay. Then Priscilla looked at me and said, "Please do it for us." Because Elvis had requested you to sing Heavenly Father, is what Vernon told Kathy. So it must have been in the will. Maybe like a living will. If I die, when I die, this is what I want. I don't know. Could have been, but I don't think so. Priscilla looked at me and asked, "Have you seen Elvis yet?" I said no, and she pointed. He's right up there, indicating that his body was lying in state, where the piano had been in the music room. So let's think about that. I think that's the most clear description that I've heard of where Elvis's body was laying in state, where the piano's at right now. That's where Elvis was laying in state. I pictured for some reason that he was by the stairs because Lisa had mentioned something about people walking. Maybe I guess that's where the line was probably at. I wasn't listening to everything Priscilla said. I couldn't seem to grasp the finality of it all. I do remember Priscilla saying, "I know you really cared, Kathy." I guess that's why she wanted someone with me when I viewed the body. She probably thought I might faint or something. Priscilla was very much a lady and appeared to have everything under control. And it was good that she did because Vernon was grief-stricken. He just kept walking around the house mumbling, "Elvis, my boy. My boy's dead. He's gone." So, but Kathy says that Priscilla was very much under control, was not emotional at all, basically. But Vernon was just walking around grief-stricken. Well, with great hesitation and a heavy heart, I approached the bier, B-I-E-R, I guess maybe the casket. Then I stopped, asked God for strength, and looked down at Elvis. He was wearing a white suit, powder blue shirt, and a white tie. On his finger was his ring with the letters TCB and lightning bolt pattern. Now, the ring was removed from his finger before burial, but I love the idea of just putting it on his finger where the mourners could see it. Charlie Hodge and Larry Geller had done Elvis's hair and the makeup for the body's last public display. While working on the body, Charlie said, "He's thin now." The excess water had left his body, which proves that Elvis was not fat. So let's talk about that for a second. I just read a bunch of medical stuff the other day that stated Elvis was 350 pounds at his death. Well, what we know now is that he was dying. He was dying slowly. And his body was retaining water. His heart was twice the size of a normal person's heart. And, you know, when you go into congestive heart failure, your body starts retaining water. And all the other stuff that was going on, he was you know, the constipation, all that stuff from, well, you know, I mean, everybody knows. And if you don't know, I'm gonna do a special on it. Kind of walk everybody through it, talk about it, like the real factual stuff, not just the people that stated, well, Kathy had said Elvis had cancer because Charlie had said Elvis had cancer, and I guess Dr. Nick had told him or somebody had told him. And then, you know, there's a lot of people that are kind of giving excuses for that, which is fine, and it's very likely could be a real excuse. That there were things that kind of mimic cancer back in the day, and they would say cancer-like. And so cancer-like, people would think cancer. Anyhow, I fought back tears desperately, and the pain in my chest was almost paralyzing as I took his hands in the casket. Charlie walked up beside me, stroking Elvis's hair, said, "Doesn't he look pretty? No more pain and no more fat." I wouldn't put it past Charlie to be drinking. I mean, if I was him, I would be drinking. If I was drinking all the time anyways, I would have been drinking that day for sure. No more pain, no more fat. I was still petting Elvis's hands, which had lost the water bloat and looked just like they had so many months before. I could see the bones in his fingers for the first time in ever so long. Charlie held up well with tears in his eyes, but a smile on his face as we stood together alone with Elvis and comforted one another. Charlie hugged me and said, "Through all his relationships, I know Elvis loved you, Kathy." The next thing I remember, I was being driven to my motel and was told that the airline had lost my baggage. Oh no, I thought, the dress I'm going to wear to the funeral tomorrow is in there. I still have my carry-on bag that I'd packed for the tour, but for the tour that wasn't to be. But I couldn't remember what was in it. Gaudy, skimpy costumes probably, and no makeup was all I could think of. I apologize for how I'm reading. I still have this congestion stuff in my upper sinus area, and it's difficult. I have to really focus to try to read with some, you know, succinctly, so y'all can understand me. I turned on the TV set. Nothing but news of Elvis's death was being broadcast on every channel. That's when it hit me that this wasn't just my own personal tragedy, but the whole world was grieving. Soon I fell asleep, but was awakened by screaming sirens that seemed endless. Well, I was to learn the next day that in the area right in front of Graceland Gates, a tragic accident occurred. A drunken teenager drove through the crowd at 50 miles an hour, taking the lives of two 19-year-old girls. The accident added more grief to an event already filled with so much heartache. Early the next morning, I met with the other singers at Graceland, including James Blackwood, Jake Hess, the Stamps, Charlie Hodge, and Jackie Kahane, who was to deliver the eulogy, and Pastor C.W. Bradley, which was a longtime friend of Vernon's, and Rex Humbard, the television minister. We hurriedly prepared for the service that afternoon. Afterwards, friends and family continued to console one another. We discussed how he died in his barber chair, clutching a book entitled The Face of Jesus to his chest. Okay, so that's another thing that is obviously different than what we've heard. And of course, we know Kathy wasn't there. And we know that very possibly things were said to try to lessen the shock for everybody that loved Elvis. Like we heard Joe Esposito, supposedly, the first statement he gave was that Elvis had passed away in his bed. Now, I could understand him doing that, saying that. And I'm not mad. I'm not mad if Joe said that. Y'all remember Joe saying that, reading it somewhere in a book or some sort of a something? But I never heard in his barber chair. This is 1987. 10 years after Elvis passed. Over 100 people had been invited to the memorial services at Graceland. Everyone that I could see was in black except for me. Well, I was thankful that I'd packed one dress along with my stage costumes in my tour bag. However, it was creamy white. I suddenly remembered that when Elvis had given me a white car instead of black, he stated, "I like you better in white." And then he requested, "I'll be sure to wear white at my funeral." Well, I remember trying very hard not to cry for hours so I wouldn't be too hoarse to sing. Singing at Elvis's memorial was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my entire life. I was trembling and felt faint most of the time. I can't even begin to tell you how awful it was for me. I kept telling myself, "Don't cry, don't cry." I kept thinking about Elvis, singing at the funeral for a policeman in Denver once, and I said to myself, if he could do it, then I can too. For some reason, the Associated Press reported that I sang many Elvis songs during the memorial service, but I sang Heavenly Father, and that's all I sang. Hovey Lister of the Statesman Quartet accompanied me on the piano, but he never played the song Heavenly Father the way I usually sang it with Elvis. I must have been imagining things, but I honestly thought I heard Elvis saying laughingly, "That's not the way we arranged it." Just as I started singing, another odd thing occurred. The lights at Graceland began flickering on and off, and continued doing so all through the song. When I had finished singing, the lights stabilized and never blinked. That reminds me of something I just watched of Engelbert Humperdinck saying that he had Elvis's suite in Las Vegas after Elvis had passed, and he was doing a show there. And he was working up an Elvis song, and then the lights started flashing off and on. Did he copycat that? Or is this Elvis really doing this? Doing this to Kathy. Doing it to Engelbert Humperdinck. The weather was bright, hot, and humid, and the National Guard was at Graceland to back up the hundreds of policemen and the flags that were all half-mast. Just as the pallbearers left the Graceland entrance... Excuse me, I'm sorry. A huge branch of an oak tree near the front door came crashing down, falling across the sidewalk right behind them. Finally, the hearse pulled away, and followed by a long stream of white limousines, it headed for the Midtown Memphis and the cream stone mausoleum at Forest Hill Cemetery. The funeral procession passed thousands and thousands of people, lined up curbside for as far as the eye could see. Now, it was estimated later that more than 100,000 viewers viewed the procession. 100,000 viewed the procession on the streets. There were 16 white Cadillac limousines lined up directly behind the hearse. The procession is his mystery train, Charlie pointed out, making references to Elvis's early hit song. Then he proceeded to sing it. Train I ride, 16 coaches long. Elvis's hearse was the engine, followed by 16 coaches. It was unplanned, and that was eerie. Interesting. Once again, he said the procession is his mystery train. Train I ride, 16 coaches long, and there were 16 white Cadillac limousines lined up directly behind the hearse. James Burton, his wife Louise, and I rode together in the 7th coach. As we drove under an overpass, Literally hundreds of people dangled over the edge. Oh my gosh. Many jumped, hoping to land on Elvis's hearse, but they all landed on the pavement. My goodness. That wasn't one of y'all, was it? Let me know. Some of the multitude were wearing Elvis buttons and all held hats on their bare hands to their hearts. As the procession passed, they were the poor, the nondescript, the laborer, the farmer, young, old, middle-aged. They were truly Elvis's people. I thought of the mourners like Carolyn Kennedy. Getting emotional here. I thought of the mourners like Carolyn Kennedy, President John Kennedy's daughter, and Anne Margaret, a famous movie and television star, sharing their grief with a service station attendant on the corner and the bank teller down the street. Elvis's death affected the entire fabric of the country. When we arrived at the cemetery, I was stunned by the sheer number of flowers. Someone said later that there were over 3,000 sprays and arrangements lined up along the walkway against the mausoleum. The arrangements and sprays were all sizes and shapes. They were replicas of hound dogs, teddy bears, guitars, musical notes, and anything that symbolized Elvis's life. Vernon sweetly requested that the fans each be allowed to take one flower. It was one of the most touching tributes I've ever seen. Elvis's body was temporarily entombed in a sealed crypt in the same mausoleum where his mother Gladys lay. The ceremony at the mausoleum lasted less than 10 minutes. Vernon was one of the last to leave as he watched his only surviving child being sealed away in a concrete crypt. Vernon was so overcome that he had to be led away from the scene. After the memorial service, we returned to Graceland and spent a quiet evening talking to one another. As I ate dinner with Vernon, he said to me, "Elvis loves so much to hear you sing that song, Kathy. He would have been proud of you today." "Well, I was honored, and I feel privileged to have done it, Vernon," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. During the evening, Linda stopped by wearing a lavender dress, as Elvis had requested. We visited for a little while. After she left, Ginger came in and stayed with us the rest of the evening. That same night, one old friend discussed with us in quiet confidence about how Elvis's bone cancer had spread throughout his entire body. We wondered how he withstood all that pain up to the end. So it wasn't Charlie. She said, the same night, one old friend discussed with us in quiet confidence about how Elvis's bone cancer had spread through his entire body. Don't think it was Dr. Nick, or she would have mentioned Dr. Nick. I'm still bewildered after all these years and after all the words written about Elvis and his death, just why cancer was never mentioned, other than in two other books, one by Larry Geller and another by Charlie Hodge. First off, well, she must have known that Charlie was writing a book. Charlie's book didn't come out until January of '88. This book came out in August of '87. And this is the first edition. So very strange. I don't understand here. Don't understand. Okay. Maybe y'all do. Maybe y'all know. The press is quick to jump on drugs, but even three-corner reports prove that heart failure, not drugs, caused his death. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, Los Angeles coroner, advised Chief Medical Examiner of Shelby County, Tennessee, Dr. Francisco, to appoint a panel of experts to assist in the examination as he had done in the case of Robert Kennedy. In his book, Noguchi said there was no trace of the illegal drugs, such as heroin, cocaine, or hashish, normally found in overdose cases. Furthermore, not one of the prescription drugs was at a toxic level. It doesn't seem to me toxic, I guess, but you got the codeine that we've heard about being 10 times the normal level of and how he was allergic to that, so I don't get what she's writing here. Another toxicologist, Dr. Francisco, said, had noted that the medications were in the therapeutic range and individually did not constitute an overdose. Okay, so therapeutic. That was talking about that the codeine was 10 times the therapeutic dosage. Haven't we all heard that? Anyway, so she's writing this. Also, he emphasized the fact that the drugs were prescribed and there were no illegal drugs that turned up on the autopsy. That's true. No illegal drugs. Later, another Memphis pathologist told Noguchi that Elvis had been able to function normally to the end, which is not the case in polypharmacy victims, who are dazed and drowsy when near death and almost unable to move. A total of 3 pathologists and 1 toxicologist from the University of Tennessee and 2 other toxicologists from other areas agreed that there's no evidence the medication present in the body of Elvis Presley caused or made any significant contribution to his death. Yet, the rumor that Elvis died of an overdose persists. Even when experts have made it clear that the medication or drugs had nothing to do with his death. The worst offenders are members of the news media, who don't bother researching their own files to get the truth of the matter. After the memorial, guests moved around, food was served, and I remember observing Lisa for a little while as she wandered among the guests repeating, "My daddy's dead. My daddy's dead." By the time I was emotionally and physically exhausted, I went back to my hotel room to rest, and by the time I got there, the total impact of Elvis's death hit me. I couldn't believe the telephone wouldn't ring and it would be him talking about one thing or the other. I couldn't believe that we would never laugh again together, hold deep conversations about life, never sing together again. The loss of Elvis was unbearable to me. I wished he'd call and say, "Oh boy, this is the best prank I ever pulled on anybody." And then, oh God, I thought, he's gone. He's really gone. But I remembered Elvis saying, "If there's a way I can reach out and give you a sign from the other side, I will." Well, maybe the song, maybe the lights at Graceland, maybe the oak branch, or even the fact that for days after his death it rained all over the world, as if the world itself was crying, in places that had been suffering from drought. Who knows if these were signs from the other side or just coincidental happenings? I don't, and those who would be the first to poke fun at my statements can't prove it was coincidental or a sign from the other side any more than I can. I guess the worst thing to cope with were the continual reminders about Elvis that were everywhere. Hardly a day went by that somebody wouldn't ask me about him. I never really had the opportunity to even forget my grief. After all these years, I still can't. At one point, I got so tired of the endless questions about him that I denied my own existence. "Are you Kathy Westmoreland?" "No." "Oh, okay, I didn't think so." There were souvenirs and trinkets on display everywhere. In fact, wherever I went, it was Elvis, 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 Elvis. I'd go to the supermarket and they were playing his records constantly. Pictures of Elvis were in the magazines I read. His name and photo were in the newspapers. I picked up one tabloid given a lot of background on the weeks prior to Elvis's death. And there was a story saying Ginger was in Memphis while Elvis was on tour, and a quote from Linda Thompson. "I know he sent Ginger back to Memphis while he was on tour so he could go out with Kathy Westmoreland." I wanted to cry nearly every minute, but I couldn't. And even now, 10 years later, it's happening again. It's not like a member of your family has died, but you recover from a personal, after you recover from a personal period of mourning. Besides, people were always saying negative, cruel, and untrue things about Elvis. I had to cope with that, and I still have trouble ignoring stupid falsehoods about Elvis and the way he lived. My thoughts kept wandering back to the days and times when Elvis was alive. I would replay conversations in my mind and weigh their significance. For instance, I thought of the time at Graceland when I came into the house after swimming in the pool. Elvis was in a den watching TV. When I entered the room, he held out his hands, and they were very swollen. My hands, just water." Elvis was disgusted that his hands had gotten so bloated. I sat down on the floor with him and tried to change the subject away from his hands. "Where do you think the music is going from here? Where do you think it's headed next?" He thought for a moment and said, "Rock and roll is here to stay. It'll be here forever." Back in the beginning, even Elvis thought he might be just a flash in the pan. He was not talking about himself, he was simply talking about the music. It was amazing to me. The guy who probably did more for rock and roll than anyone else was not claiming any credit for it. This was the man who was the first in history to sell 1 million records. And he was the first to ever receive a gold record for this achievement. It wasn't false humility on his part. He simply felt that rock and roll belonged to everybody. I recall people yelling at him on stage, "Elvis, you're the king," and he would say, "Thank you very much, but there's only one king, and that's Christ." My mind left that conversation and on to another about his career. He wanted so much to do a motion picture that would be a classic. Those days in Baltimore when we were actually dating again, he was lamenting turning down A Star is Born about a year before. So they were dating, which means that they were dating when he's engaged to Ginger. So, oh, what do y'all think about that? About her saying that, about what Ginger says? I know some of y'all are on Ginger's pages, and like I said, I've seen some of y'all ask, hey, have a conversation with Rare of his photos. How often I thought of other conversations. Like the time he told me about a group of monks in Hawaii that have precognitive knowledge of when they are to die. He turned to me and said, I believe I'll know when it's my time. You can know those things if you want to. Elvis was the most intuitive psychic man I'd ever known. I remember that we discussed astral projection experiences and confided in each other about our UFO encounters. If I could have been, now, was it in this book that I read about, I don't think it was, about Elvis? There was some sort of a light in Hollywood, one of his houses there in Beverly Hills, and he went looking for it, and everybody was like, what happened, where'd it go? And he's like, it'll be back. Do y'all remember that? Was it this book or some other book I read? I read so many books I kind of get lost, but the fact that she's bringing it up is interesting because just that it is. Okay. If I could have been left alone in my grief, left with my thoughts about Elvis, it would have been easier to cope with the changes in my life. But in death, Elvis became an even bigger star, if that's possible. His records continued to sell at an even faster rate than when he was alive, and people seem more curious than ever about every aspect of this man's life. You're telling us, Kathy, it's 2024, baby. That's 37 years later, and we're still talking about it, right? All of us close to Elvis were besieged with offers from book publishers, tabloid gossip sheets, and magazines, but I refused them all. I simply wanted to keep my memories to myself. I thought our relationship was my business, and there are some things that are simply not for sale. I felt it was in poor taste to do anything at the time, anyway, in a light of all the trash being marketed. The most ludicrous offer of all came in late 1980 or early 81. I received a long-distance phone call from Miami. The voice on the other end of the line introduced himself as Michael Jones. I'm with a multi-million-dollar company, he said, and we're backing a guy by the name of Civil Nora. He looks just like Elvis and he sounds just like Elvis. I'd like you to send you a tape to see what you think of him. I was startled. How'd you get my number? Oh, J.D. Sumner told me to get in touch with you. J.D. gave me your number. Well, sure, I said. I'll be glad to listen to it. As I thought to myself, oh, not another one. What I need to know, he continued, is just how much it would make. Just how much it would take, just like I mentioned before. We are $1 million company. What will it take for you to get you to endorse him as either Elvis reincarnated or to say that Elvis never really died, that he just got tired of it all and went into hiding to get some rest, and that this is Elvis coming back? I couldn't believe the crassness of his remark. No, thank you, I told him. I'm not interested. Well, he interjected, wait a minute. Surely there must be a figure we could arrive at. I said, no, thank you. There is not a figure. And he was stupid enough to ask why. Well, I received a tape later in the mail, listened to the first 10 seconds of a poor imitation of Elvis, and then turned it off. The name he used was obviously Elvis Aaron, spelled backwards, but missing one A. I was disgusted and called J.D. He laughed and said, I gave the guy your number. I told the guy I saw Elvis in that box, he was dead. If Elvis got out of that box, then brother, we all got something to look forward to. Then J.D. added, I told him if you can get Kathy Westmoreland to do it, then I'll do it. J.D. knew he was safe. He just wanted me to go through what he'd gone through. On January 8th, 1978, I went back to Graceland for the first time since Elvis's death to visit his new gravesite. It was strange. We laughed and played in that whole area, and now all of a sudden, boom, it's his grave. It was freezing weather. There were thousands of people at the gate. When the officials realized I was there, they escorted the people away from the grave and closed it off so I could be there alone. At that point, Graceland had not been open to the public, but the gravesite was. After an incredibly emotionally charged visit, 2 deputies informed me that the sheriff, Gene Barksdale, wished to see me at his office downtown, and they asked me to please get in the car with him. I was shocked when I arrived, and his office was packed with people and the members of the press. It was a surprise swearing-in ceremony for me. Sheriff Barksdale choked back the tears and had a quiver in his voice. Oh, it makes me emotional. A quiver in his voice as he asked me to raise my right hand and repeat after him the oath of a deputy sheriff. I was honored and filled with emotion as he swore me in. I was honorary Deputy Sheriff Patrolman 100, Shelby County, Tennessee. I kept thinking that Elvis would be so proud. I was presented with a badge, a shirt pin, and a sleeve patch. It was indeed a proud moment for me, and I treasure that time even today. There are so many ironies after Elvis's death. For instance, Elvis took a definitive measure to exclude certain people from his personal estate by leaving everything to Lisa Marie. But due to a strange set of circumstances, including the consecutive deaths of the executors, Vernon and Minnie Mae, the very person he did not want to have control now does control the estate. Let me read that again. That'll help me to get over my emotions from that last part. There are so many ironies after Elvis's death. For instance, Elvis took definite measures to exclude certain people from his personal estate by leaving everything to Lisa Marie. But due to a strange set of circumstances, including the consecutive deaths of the executors, Vernon and Minnie Mae, the very person he did not want to control the estate now does control the estate. Not only has this occurred, but on the Graceland payroll are persons who were merely tolerated by Elvis as acquaintances or associates, some who were at one time fired by him. These individuals are now handling the affairs of his estate and representing themselves publicly as Elvis's best friends. I wonder what Elvis would think if he were alive today. She's basically saying, Priscilla, shame, 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 shame on you. Shame on you, Priscilla. Well, it's been so very hard for me many years now to express to people that part of me that died with Elvis. A bright, shining light went out of my life. As often as I've had to answer an endless string of questions about my relationship with him, I've never quite given an answer that would open the wound again because I'm still trying down inside to let it heal. How do you take all the feelings of love and discovery and maturing and respect and laughing and disappointment over 7 years and squeeze it into 25 seconds, or 25 words or less answer? How do you forget the loss of one so loving and free-spirited as Elvis when his legacy is alive and real as it was 10 years ago? Where do you put those sweet memories when they don't begin to fade, but rather grow with clarity each passing year? You see, Elvis was more than a great musician and an entertainer, more than another Valentino, and more than a kind and giving man. He was more than a lover to me. We may have started that way, and certainly there were rough times for us along the way, but in those 7 years I came to understand him. Something so much deeper than physical attraction grew and matured. We looked at life the same way, we shared this sense of humor, we grew to understand one another on a level beyond the capacity or need to put into words. Elvis was not a brother, he was my soulmate, and though I'll miss him dearly for the rest of my days, I believe he is with his Lord now, and has the answers to all those big questions. Wherever Elvis Presley is, I can assure you, there is glorious music. I can still hear his voice as if it were yesterday when he said, Kathy, when and where we meet again, it will be more beautiful than we could ever imagine here on earth. That's the end of Elvis and Kathy. All right. Well, thank you for joining this journey with me. We've got a lot more books to read as well. I'm sorry and sad to see that this is over. I probably might do one more follow-up video. I'm sorry. I'm not feeling good. And I still got this dairy conversation come up that I got to record and do with him. But maybe we'll have one more conversation about this book in general. Just overall, maybe some stuff that maybe we researched from later on. Maybe stuff that you send me that I'll add to it. They definitely had a real relationship. You know, I mean, she wouldn't have came back. Elvis wouldn't have brought her back if there wasn't something deep there between both of them. Normally, you don't have a relationship with somebody that's your employee and then stay that way even when you break up, you know, and then have huge fights and then split up again kind of, and then at the very end, Linda Thompson said that Elvis had sent Ginger home so Kathy could be with him. Maybe. This is the first time I heard that myself. Well, let me know what y'all think, as always. And if you made it to the book, M-I-T-T-E, and let's say Kathy this time. That's a little code name. M-I-T-T-E, Kathy. All right, y'all. I appreciate you. I probably should have put the book down instead of trying to get through that emotionally. But, you know, I know y'all experience and feel the same things I do. Like, you know, normally I still cry when I go to Graceland at the gravesite, or when I read books about his death, or I watched the Netflix show last night with my wife. The Rise and Fall of Elvis Presley, I think it was, about the 68 comeback special and stuff. Wonderful. It's brilliant. Don't like the fact that Priscilla was in it as much as she was. But when I got up from the bed after he finished singing a certain song, my wife, of course, said, you know, he was so amazingly talented, and I basically said, all I could say is I'm humbled. You know, I'm a really good singer. I know I am. I've had songs in the radio. I'm a songwriter. Play trumpet, play guitar, play euphonium. I can play piano. I can play drums. I can do it all. I can do it all, literally. I can make my own record myself, like the whole band. But watching Elvis sing humbled me beyond anything else I can think of. And that's all I could say is at the very end, it was, I'm humbled. Truly humbled at the amazing amount of talent Elvis had. You put all the other singers that are out there and combine them, all of them, they still wouldn't touch Elvis. Combine them all, they still would not touch Elvis. All right, this is Rare with Photos. I may be loading something later on to the other channel as well. I just can't help believing. Well, thanks again. Thanks for taking this journey with me on this book, and we'll see you later, okay? Bye.